What does it take for an entire nation's war doctrine to collapse in a single day? For Japan, in August 1945, it started with a single, decoded message, short, clinical, and impossible. A city's name sent back like a verdict from somewhere that should still be whole. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, men who had measured victory in spirit and sacrifice listened to that name and felt a private, growing fracture. Their strategy wasn't built on maps or factories, but on a belief that bled into policy, that the American will would snap before theirs. Then came a message from a place that no longer existed, and belief met a fact it could not bend. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, in a subterranean war room lit by wavering lamps and dominated by lacquered maps, Japan's leaders operate on a sacred belief that the pure, unyielding spirit of their warriors can overcome any material disadvantage. It isn't just a slogan pinned to a wall, it's doctrine. It shapes intelligence, it trims logistics, it justifies risk. Generals trade calculations for conviction. Ministers speak of honor rather than factories. Every plan is measured not in tanks or tons of steel, but in willpower. Outside, the world is quietly reshaping itself. Down here, faith still feels like a weapon. This belief was not a line on a map or a note in a briefing. Buried under the palace, it had become doctrine and devotion. It read like scripture, "Spirit could trump steel." So the generals didn't just calculate logistics, they prayed. They genuinely believed American soldiers would crack after 30 or 40,000 deaths, that American society was soft, self-centered, and brittle under pressure. Decisions were made with that magic number in mind, sacrifices accepted because the end would vindicate the means. That faith blinded them to factories and railways, to raw numbers, and to the terrifying possibility that faith alone might not win a modern war. The mantra echoes in the chamber, "One Japanese soldier is worth 4 Americans." It isn't a dry statistic, it's scripture, a moral equation that turns individual courage into a force multiplier and calls faith proof of victory. Spirit, not steel, is the measure. Sacrifice is currency. Disproportionate losses are tolerable because willpower, they believe, will snap the enemy's resolve long before their islands fall. That conviction simplifies terrible choices into tidy strategy, and it hardens minds against messy facts. So when hard numbers and cautious admirals whisper doubt, the doctrine lets them shrug dangerous, self-protecting blindness that will soon meet an unforgiving reality. They brushed off the alarms. Even their own admirals, men like Yamamoto, who warned that America was a sleeping giant, were sidelined as troublemakers. The bunker's creed beat louder than any intelligence report. Spirit trumps industry, will beats supply. Factory floors, assembly lines, production schedules, these were abstract nouns, not enemies to fear. Grainy photos of shipyards and columns of trucks were waved away as bravado, not evidence. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a collective choice to believe a comforting story over ugly data. That refusal to reckon with reality didn't just blind them, it preserved the myth that would sustain Japan's war effort until it collapsed. By 1945, that faith was all that kept the machine moving. Fact and logistics had been hollowed out until ideology alone fed factories, fleets, and frontline orders. Schools, newspapers, shrines, every public voice rehearsed the same calculus. Spirit over matter, sacrifice over supply. Young men were taught to prefer death to dishonor. Whole communities were reshaped to sustain a war that material shortages could no longer support. It wasn't merely strategy. It became the nation's nervous system, an idea turned into policy, ritual, and mandate. That single belief would both steel the people and blind the rulers, the very men who would soon decide the empire's fate. When a nation's belief is the last pillar holding it up, that belief takes a face, and in the bunker, that face is General Anami, stoic, immovable. He moves like a man who has swallowed duty and never tasted doubt. His presence settles the room the way a gavel settles a court. Officers look to him not just for orders, but for moral proof that the war can still be willed into victory. He rarely raises his voice. He rarely smiles. Every decision seems weighed against some internal code of honor that has outlived practicality, and in that quiet resolve, you can already hear the first cracks forming in their confidence. Prime Minister Suzuki is an old man in a tight suit and tighter position, worn down by protocol and the long arc of a war he once believed in. He listens more than he speaks, eyes flicking between the bunker's hardliners and the shrinking facts on their maps. Fanaticism courts him with honor. Reality whispers of ruin. He feels both urges like weights on his chest, pride, duty, fear. Every decision tastes of history. He knows that any move could save lives or shatter a nation's soul. Quietly, almost to himself, he measures the cost, searching for a path that will not betray either truth or people. And then there's Foreign Minister Togo, calm, measured, the one who trusts papers and precedent more than slogans, yet privately he harbors a terrible conviction. Their sacred doctrine might be a suicide pact. He reads the production reports alone, fingers tracing numbers that don't lie, and every sum corrodes the old certainties. He argues for talks, for pragmatism, for a way out, but he knows how dangerous it is to speak truth in a room that treats doubt as betrayal. His fear isn't theatrical. It's slow, steady, and rational, an ache behind the throat that will, sooner or later, begin to shape the choices made in that bunker. The bunker feels less like a command center and more like a tomb of shared conviction, low ceilings, recycled air, men who have trained themselves to believe with religious intensity. Conversations loop back on familiar slogans. Spirit beats material, 1 soldier equals 4. Evidence that doesn't fit the myth is shrugged away as enemy lies. Maps and intelligence reports gather dust while dogma takes the floor. Even cautious voices, Togo's quiet doubts, Anami's stubborn certainty, are softened, censored by the room's own appetite for certainty. Outside the thick walls, the war grinds on, but inside everything is insulated against reality until an impossible message finally forces its way in. August 6th, the faith begins to crack. Deep in the dim headquarters, a radio coughs to life static, a helpless scramble of syllables, words breaking like glass. Young operators lean in, pencils frozen over logbooks. Voices jitter across the wire, fragmented half evidence and half cry. Officers who have lived on conviction for years exchange looks that don't know what to say. For the first time, the bunker hears uncertainty spoken aloud. A single, garbled transmission, a repeated, terrible syllable that lands in the room like a stone. The radio crackles, a tangle of static and clipped syllables, and then one word cuts through like a blade. Hiroshima. For a moment it hangs there clear, impossible, while the rest of the transmission unspools as broken fragments. Fire, silence, people gone, a city erased. Voices overlap, urgent and useless, descriptions tumbling over one another until meaning dissolves into panic. In the war room, pens stop. Men who have argued philosophy and strategy for years stare at the ceiling as if answers might fall from it. That single name reframes everything. It turns rumor into a demand for proof and faith into a sudden, fragile doubt. The radio report is blunt. The city was vaporized by a single, unknown type of bomb. For a few heartbeat-long seconds, the bunker is suspended between incomprehension and denial. Paper rustles. Men look at one another without speaking. It's too clean. Two final cities don't just disappear. Someone laughs, a short, hollow sound that tries to turn fear into ridicule. Others clutch at routine explanations. A massive conventional raid, a catastrophic firestorm. But every theory feels like wishful thinking. The word bomb settles into the room like a stone. Disbelief is the first defense. The question beneath it is cruel and immediate. How could this be true? General Umezu slams the report onto the table like an accusation. Silence snaps. He refuses the impossible. It was, he says sharply, a massive conventional raid, misreported in the confusion. Planes, bombs, chaos. Not some supernatural weapon. His words are defiant and final, a lifeline to the old way of seeing the enemy, buying time for denial in a room suddenly short on certainty. But the data doesn't fit. An aide slips in with a sheaf of radar logs, cold, bureaucratic numbers that suddenly feel like a verdict. The records are blunt. Only 3 B-29 seconds tracked over Hiroshima at the exact moment of the blast. 3 planes, not a fleet, not a massive raid. 3. The bunker goes quiet enough to hear the pages turn. Faces that minutes before argued bravado now study figures that refuse to lie. If only 3 planes were there, then whatever happened was not a conventional bombing. Something else occurred. Admiral Toyota, the one who'd studied American tactics for decades, simply shakes his head and says the obvious. 3 planes cannot destroy a city. The words land like a blow. This isn't bravado, it's technical bafflement. A single B-29's load, typical bombing patterns, the physics of blast and fire, none of it fits the pilot's report. The radar says 3 aircraft. The eyewitnesses say ruin. Toyota stares at the data as if it were a new language, and the room realizes they're not facing a bigger army so much as a weapon that breaks the rules they've always trusted. It violated every rule they'd built their war on. Up until that morning, battles were arithmetic. Guns, armor, fuel, bodies. There were curves to predict blast, logistics to balance losses, thresholds you could not cross. Now a city had been erased by 3 planes, an outcome no table, no veteran officer, no doctrine could account for. It wasn't a clever tactic or propaganda. It was a physics problem that refused to fit their models. In the bunker, the silence thickened, notes left unread, voices reduced to half-formed questions, until someone, almost mechanically, ordered a reconnaissance flight. If truth could be seen from the sky, they would see it. They dispatch a reconnaissance flight at once high priority, every available plane pressed into service. Engines scream to life above the palace. Pilots climb into the blue, tasked with the impossible, confirm whether Hiroshima is truly gone. Below, the bunker holds its breath. Papers lie untouched, tea grows cold, officers stare at maps and radios as if willing an answer. Time stretches thin. The fate of strategy waits on a single transmission. By 10 a.m., the radio crackles to life, the reconnaissance pilot on the line, his voice trembling through the static. He speaks in halting bursts, breathless and stunned, words tumbling out before he can steady them. He repeats fragments, cuts himself off, as if the language can't contain what he's trying to report. In the bunker, every head leans in, waiting. From 150 miles away, the pilot's voice was thin with something between awe and fear, but what he reported left no room for bravado. A colossal mushroom cloud, a living column of smoke and fire, still boiling into the stratosphere. It climbed and unfurled like a mountain on the move, white at the crown, bruised red at the throat, casting a long, silent shadow even at that distance. He swallowed and tried to name it with familiar terms: raid, blast, explosion, but none fit. On the other end of the line, the bunker felt impossibly small, the old certainties suddenly fragile under that monstrous, rising sky. Over the radio, the pilot tries to put it into words and keeps failing. From below him, the mushroom cloud didn't just rise, it glowed, an impossible palette, sickly green at the base, bruised violet in the swelling crown, a molten blinding orange at the heart, like a second dying sun. Edges flashed with an almost metallic sheen. It was not a storm, not fire, not anything he'd ever been taught to expect in combat. The sky itself looked wrong. His voice cracks as he searches for analogies and finds none. He tightens the throttles and gets closer, and the tremor in his reports sharpens. As he closes in, the pilot's voice phrased short bursts, half sentences, nothing like the calm reports they expect. The city center, he says, is simply gone. There are no roofs, no streets, only a blackened crater rimmed by a raging hurricane-hot firestorm that eats anything left upright. Heat waves ripple the air. Ash falls like snow. He can't find landmarks. He can't find people. He keeps repeating the same impossible word, gone. His trembling report lands in the bunker like a verdict, and from the outskirts, other radios begin to whisper of a blinding flash, brighter than the sun. Reports from the outskirts began to trickle in, hushed and disbelieving. A single blinding flash of light, brighter than the sun, ripping the morning apart. People thought dawn had come twice. Windows vaporized in an instant. Faces were seared with light that felt alive. Animals went silent. For a few stunned seconds, there was nothing but a terrible white clarity, as if the world had been polished to a glare. Survivors fumbled for words and found none, only similes that fell short. And then, always in the same trembling voice, they added what followed the godlike shockwave that flattened everything for miles. Sato steps forward and, quieter than the mushroom cloud, begins to read numbers that feel like a verdict. The Manhattan Project wasn't a single bomb, it was a nation remade. He lists labs and plants, uranium mines and enrichment facilities, thousands of scientists and technicians, and a price tag greater than Japan's entire military budget for the previous year. The scale, factories, transport, research, secrecy could not be duplicated here. Faces in the room go still. The idea this was a one-off collapses. This wasn't an American miracle you could stumble on. It was industrial, scientific power organized to a terrifying degree. For the first time, the impossible is becoming undeniable, not whispered rumors or enemy lies, but hard, physical proof that refuses to be ignored. Radar logs. A trembling reconnaissance pilot describing a mushroom cloud that boiled into the stratosphere. Eyewitnesses who speak of a light brighter than the sun and a heat that turned streets to ash. Each piece of evidence piles on the last, a ledger that cancels out comforting myths. Their doctrine, built on spirit and will, suddenly looks like wishful thinking in the face of raw, reproducible physics. The bunker grows quiet. The leaders, shaken, move to convene the Supreme War Council. The Supreme War Council is convened. They file into the windowless chamber like men entering a shrine. But the reverence here is not for victory. It's for survival. There is no swagger, no raised voices. The usual bravado has evaporated, replaced by a thick, tangible dread that settles over the table like dust. Men who once traded vows of honor now speak in clipped, cautious breaths. Folders lie open, maps lie half unfolded. The reports at the center of the table seem to hum with their own truth. Every eye drifts to the radio logs and reconnaissance sketches, each glance a quiet admission that what they face may be beyond any plan they have left. Prime Minister Suzuki stares down at the paper as if it might change if he looks hard enough. The preliminary reports lie on the table like a verdict. Radar blips, a pilot's trembling voice, eyewitness accounts that don't fit any map of war they knew. He feels the bunker's air grow heavier, as if the room itself is trying to swallow the truth. Years of confident rhetoric and ritual certainty are being reduced to numbers on a page. His hands shake. His jaw clenches. For the first time, the abstract fear they'd banished to speeches becomes concrete, and the silence that follows is not bravado, but naked, waiting dread perfect fuel for the next desperate denial. General Anami holds firm, jaw set, eyes cold, a living monument to the idea that will can bend the world. He slams his fist into the table like punctuation, and in a voice that brooks no contradiction, he spits it out. This is American propaganda, a psychological trick to break our will. Short, brutal. The bunker seems to exhale around him. Officers glance at one another, some relieved, some unsettled. Anami doesn't just deny the bomb, he rejects the premise that anything could overturn their creed. His words are meant to steady men. Instead, they hang in the stale air, a challenge that not everyone in the room is ready to accept. Anami speaks through clenched teeth, insisting this is theater, a calculated bluff. Maybe, he argues, the Americans have unleashed a new kind of fuel-air terror, a monstrous blast designed to look like a supernatural weapon when it's really just an engineered illusion. It's tidy, it's explainable, and it spares them the unbearable truth that physics, industry, and cold calculation might have outstripped spirit. In the dim bunker, that argument lands like a prayer, a way to keep fighting without admitting defeat. For a moment, the room leans toward hope. But outside those words, pilot reports and radar whisper something harsher. Admiral Toyoda's face goes hard, the kind of hard that stops a room. He doesn't yell, he simply peels apart the fantasy with facts. He names instruments, not insults, radar tracks, flight logs, the pilot's shaky voice on the wire, and lays them out like cold evidence on a table. Anami-san, our own radar tracked the planes. Our own pilot saw the cloud. This is not a trick, he says, each sentence a small hammer blow. The bunker, which had been roaring with conviction a moment before, bends toward the void between belief and proof, and for the first time many in the room feel the terrible weight of what those instruments are saying. Toyoda doesn't plead or posture, he lays down cold facts. He points to their own radar tracks, 3B29 seconds over Hiroshima, and to the reconnaissance pilot who watched a mushroom cloud boil into the sky. This is not enemy propaganda or some psychological feint. It's evidence gathered by their people, on their instruments, under their command. Hearing it spoken that way changes the room. Denial becomes harder to hold. When an admiral cites homegrown data, doubt stops being theoretical and turns terrifyingly real. Whatever erased Hiroshima is not a ghost. It exists. It can be built again. A seed is planted that will force a decision no one wants. In that moment, the room falls quiet. Anami's denial hangs like a thrown gauntlet, loud in principle, hollow in proof. Men who had trained to answer every doubt with a slogan find no slogan sharp enough. Papers rustle. Someone clears his throat. The calculations, the pilot's trembling voice, the mushroom cloud on their own radar, these are not enemy lies. They are facts folding the room inward. Doubt, at first a single terrible thought, takes root. It will not bloom into surrender yet, but it acts like a crack in armor, slow, insidious, and impossible to ignore, and the bunker feels a little colder. They are beginning to understand. The certainty that carried them through years of sacrifice is thinning. Conversations die mid-sentence. Brave faces tighten into something like fear. This isn't a technical squabble over a few more tanks or planes, it's a change of category. For decades, they counted on spirit and attrition, on inflicting losses until the enemy broke. Now, with mushroom clouds and industrial math on the table, that calculation no longer holds. The tools the other side now wields make whole strategies obsolete, and the room feels smaller as the awful truth settles in. The war they planned for is not the war they are being forced to fight. They are beginning to see the truth. This isn't a contest of more ships or fiercer will. This is fighting an enemy who seems to operate on another plane, who can make the sky a weapon and bend the very physics they trusted. Cities can vanish in an instant. Entire strategies, built on honor and sacrifice, suddenly look like brittle things against a power that ignores casualty, calculus, and infrastructure alike. Their old equations, one soldier worth four, spirit over matter, snap under a new reality. The realization hits like a physical blow, a stunned silence filling the war room, and then Colonel Sato arrives with new, terrible facts. A tense debate dies mid-sentence as the door opens and Colonel Sato enters, face pale, shoulders squared, a single sheaf of papers clutched like a warning. He doesn't march in with orders. He steps in like someone carrying bad weather. The room turns toward him. Eyes sharpen, voices fade. Sato sets the report down with a sound that feels like a gavel. For a beat, nobody moves. Even the clock seems to hush. He looks up, grim and deliberate, and says nothing more than a name. The papers between them are heavy with facts. Everyone knows whatever's on those pages will change the argument, and maybe the war. Sato doesn't begin with the mushroom cloud. He doesn't mention the ruined streets or the dead. Instead, he unfolds a ledger of production, raw, brutal arithmetic the generals had long preferred to ignore. Tens of thousands of tanks, hundreds of ships, miles of assembly lines humming day and night. Steel, fuel, labor, money, an industrial appetite so vast it could turn paper plans into fleets and bombs almost overnight. For years, those figures were dismissed as exaggeration, enemy propaganda, noise. Now, in a room still smelling of fear, each number lands like a verdict. This is the engine that made the impossible real. Sato doesn't speak of bravery, he speaks in numbers. He rifles through reports and lays out a catalog of American output. Tens of thousands of tanks, yards of aircraft carriers, whole fleets of cargo ships rolling off assembly lines, munitions and trucks by the tens of thousands. Each stat lands like a hammer on the table. They had mocked these figures for years, filed them away as noise. Now they read like a declaration of war on assumptions. The scale is obscene, industrialized in a way Japan's leaders cannot imagine. And as the final totals stack up, the bunker grows suddenly, horribly small. They shift in their seats, shuffling papers, clearing throats, small, nervous motions that try to hide a larger unease. These are figures they've been fed for years. Production lists and ship manifests dutifully filed away and mentally minimized. Always through the same frame: our spirit, our sacrifice, our destiny. That lens turned every American statistic into a moral footnote, not a threat. But the gestures no longer mask it. The numbers, once abstract, now snag on the mind. They feel less like trivia and more like a tally of inevitability, and everyone in the room knows it. They had heard the figures before: tanks, carriers, ships. But in the bunker, those dry statistics had always been comfortable abstractions, proof of an enemy you could outfight with will. Now, in the shadow of Hiroshima, those same numbers stop being abstract and start feeling like walls closing in. Endless assembly lines spitting out steel, ports stacked with transports, entire factories devoted to making war while theirs had been starved. Faces go quiet, breaths shorten. The numbers are no longer a lesson in economics. They are a map of inevitability, and every digit is another step closer to a future in which Japan simply cannot keep up. Sato lets that truth hang in the air before he speaks. Sato lets the ledger close, and the room leans in with it. Numbers hang like lead. For a long breath, nothing moves, no page rustles, no chair squeaks, just the soft, impossible silence of people realizing they were wrong. Faces go from unreadable to smaller, older. Some clutch their papers like talismans. Others stare at the maps as if the ink might change its meaning. Sato watches each man absorb the scale he's just spelled out. He doesn't hurry. He lets the weight press into the bunker, lets doubt find purchase. Then, when the silence has become unbearable, he lifts his head and speaks the line that will break them. Sato leans forward, and the room leans with him. He drops his voice like a curtain. He talks not of tanks or ships this time, but of a rumored American scientific undertaking, something their intelligence had only caught in fragments and hushed cables: the Manhattan Project. It's described as secret, sprawling, almost obscene, in its scale labs and factories stitched across states, money poured in like water, scientists working in blackout. The word lands in the bunker like a bomb of its own. If even half of it is true, what they're facing isn't a bigger army. It's a different kind of power entirely. Sato leans in, voice low, and turns a whisper into a fact you can almost taste. This was no laboratory trick or clever prototype. It was a machine built across an entire nation. Secret towns carved out of the desert, rivers diverted for factories, thousands of engineers and technicians moved under absolute silence, billions of yen and more poured into a single purpose. It was vast. It was labyrinthine. It was hidden behind layers of code and compartment doors. And above all, it was staggeringly, almost insultingly expensive, so much so that it strains belief to even imagine the bill. Then Sato drops the number. He speaks slowly, as if each syllable is a pound on a ledger. The Manhattan Project cost more than Japan's entire military budget for the previous year. The math lands like a physical blow. Suddenly, the secret project stops being an abstract horror and becomes a concrete, terrible truth. One concentrated program, one unjustifiable sum, more than everything they'd poured into ships, planes, soldiers. You can see it sweep through the room, disbelief curdling into a new, colder fear. This wasn't just a stronger enemy. It was an opponent organized and resourced on an almost unimaginable scale. The council goes silent, stunned. The council sat in stunned silence, papers forgotten, faces slackening as the number landed like a blow. A single weapons program swallowed more money than Japan's whole military had spent in a year. For the first time, the abstract enemy became a mathematical abyss, fact after fact, collapsing their proud calculations. Men who had argued from honor and spirit now counted dollars and factories and felt their arguments evaporate. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone's hand trembled on a map. The scale was unimaginable. It rewrote the parameters of war. In that charged quiet, Sato's next sentence would not be theory, it would be accusation. Sato lays out the data with a kind of clinical calm that makes the room feel colder. He traces the money, the labs, the convoys of parts and people, the sealed towns and feverish shifts, and then, bluntly, this is the source of the weapon used on Hiroshima. The sentence falls like a verdict. What had been whispered and dismissed suddenly reads like a blueprint, not a trick, not propaganda, but a deliberate, industrial effort to split the atom and weaponize it. Around the table, denial falters. The numbers, the secrecy, The single-minded scale snap into a terrifying picture, and years of comforting myth begin to unravel. Sato's voice goes cold as he finishes the arithmetic of doom. If the Americans could build one such bomb, they can and they will build more. The words land and the room changes, conversation evaporates. Bravado turns to stunned calculation. Men who debated honor and tactics now squint at charts and factory totals. This isn't a one-off miracle or a clever bluff. It's proof of an industrial will that can turn physics into repeatable annihilation. For the first time, the Council sees defeat as a program, not merely a battle, a future in which cities become routine targets. Hope, in that moment, quietly fractures. The illusion is broken. It wasn't simply that America could outproduce ships and planes. They outthought, outinvented, and outscaled Japan in ways that made everything else look quaint. Talent, industry, and science were coordinated like a single machine. Labs, factories, money, and mines all aimed at problems Japanese planners had never imagined needing to solve. One secret program swallowed fortunes and turned theory into a weapon. Suddenly, the old math spirit over materiel, 1 soldier equals 4, crumbled under brute organized ingenuity. And with that cold arithmetic came a new, painful question. How many warnings had they ignored, and at what cost? Foreign Minister Togo finally breaks the silence with a question that lands like a verdict. We had intelligence on American expansion, but we chose to dismiss it. The bunker seems to shrink around that line. It's not mere hindsight, it's a direct accusation at their pride, their habits, the small denials that accumulated into catastrophe. Years of willful blindness, cultivated by ideology and comfort, are suddenly exposed as choices, not fate. The word dismiss carries weight. They didn't lack information so much as the will to believe it. For a moment, the Council has nothing to say. Silence follows, the air thick with the cost of what they refuse to see. Togo lets the sentence hang in the stale, overheated air because accepting it meant acknowledging we could not win. His voice is small but lethal. For a moment, the bunker seems to shrink. Chest-level bravado wilts into stunned silence. To admit that fact is to surrender an entire worldview. Spirit can no longer substitute for factories, for raw scale, for new physics. Faces that had argued about tactics and morale now look at one another as if seeing the map for the first time. This isn't bravado or propaganda anymore. It's arithmetic and metallurgy. The room absorbs the truth, and with it, the last comfortable myths begin to crumble. The enemy wasn't just bigger, it was different. Imagine a nation that could churn out refrigerators, radios, and tractors by day, and arm, ship, and fly entire armies by night, consumer abundance fueling industrial war-making on 2 fronts at once. Up until now, Japan's calculus had been spirit versus steel. Now, a new variable appears that makes that equation meaningless. The atomic bomb didn't just punch holes in cities, it exposed a strategic gap so wide it swallowed old plans whole. How do you even begin to fight back against a power that can erase your cities from the map? That question, terrifying and simple, leaves no good answers. It became clear in a single, terrible instant. The atomic bomb wasn't just another weapon, it was the irrefutable proof that everything they'd built their strategy on was wrong. They had treated the Americans as a soft, indulgent foe, a people you could outmatch with spirit alone. But this bomb said otherwise. It revealed a nation that could marshal science, industry, and money on a scale Japan had never even imagined. A nation that turned invention into destruction. The old slogan, "Spirit over matter," sounded hollow now, an empty prayer against the cold arithmetic of production and physics. The illusion was dead. Reality had arrived. The ideology of spirit over matter is intellectually dead. The numbers and the physics are undeniable. For decades, they'd insisted willpower could substitute for steel. Now the calculus spits back at them. Yields measured in kilotons, delivery paths logged on radar, budgets big enough to buy entire fleets, and still bankroll secret laboratories. This isn't just a bigger enemy, it's one that has weaponized invention, turned production into strategic power, and exposed their sacred equations as fantasy. In the war room, bravado evaporates. Faces go blank. The moral certainty that carried the nation is replaced by a cold, practical question. What do you do when belief no longer maps to reality? Before they can even absorb the intellectual blow, the room is seized by a new blinding chaos. Teletypes clatter. Runners slam the door with dispatches. Radio operators shout coordinates. Urgent maps spread like wounds across the table. And facts erupt faster than they can be argued. Each fresh message stripping another layer of hope until there's nothing left but the raw, cold mechanics of collapse. August 9th, the message comes like a stone through glass. From Manchuria, clean and inexorable. In the war room, the radio clicks, a clerk clears his throat, and a single line of dispatch changes everything. The last slender thread of diplomacy, the hope that some neutral power might broker an exit, snaps. You can feel the air leave the room. Men who argued over probabilities now sit mute, faces drained, fingers still on maps that suddenly mean nothing. Plans that looked like options a day ago are exposed as illusions. For the first time, the council understands they are boxed in. There may be no negotiated way out. Then came the blow everyone had feared but refused to name. The Soviet Union, the neutral power Japan had quietly hoped would broker a face-saving peace, has declared war. For weeks, the bunker had been clinging to one slender lifeline. That rope just snapped. Faces went pale. Whispered plans evaporated. Manchuria, the last wedge for negotiation, was suddenly a battlefield, and Japan's northern defenses stood exposed. This wasn't a new front. It was the closing of every exit. Suddenly, the war wasn't only about ports and fleets and cities. It was about survival. And the room understood, in a terrible, immediate way, that their options had just vanished. On August 9th, the map tore open. Soviet columns poured across the Manchurian plain in a massive surprise invasion, faster and fiercer than anyone in Tokyo dared imagine. Tanks and armored columns moved like a tide. Airborne and mechanized formations smashed through border defenses. Communication lines melted. Command posts were overrun before orders could be formed. The vaunted Kwantung Army, Japan's shield in the north, was hit with a shock so brutal it ceased to be a coherent fighting force. Overnight, the last diplomatic slender hope for a mediated peace vanished. What remained was panic, collapse, and the cold realization that the empire was now being crushed from the land itself. Reports pour in. The famed Kwantung Army, the pride of Japan, crumbled in days. Fortifications bypassed, divisions disintegrated, command thrown into chaos, field commanders killed or captured, supply lines vanished. Where legends once stood, there is only smoke, retreat, and ruined radio silence. The bulwark Japan had counted on is gone, and with it, the last realistic hope of bargaining for a livable peace. They rolled in like a tidal wave, endless columns of tanks, trucks, and artillery tearing across the plains at a speed no one had expected. Rail lines snapped. Fortified positions were ripped open. Flames and smoke trailed their advance, towns swallowed before a council could react. It wasn't just defeat by force, it was a collapsing front, a clean, brutal confirmation that nothing would hold them back now. Then came a single, brutal footnote that changed everything, an intelligence slip buried in a stack of reports. The Soviet steamroller rolling across Manchuria wasn't moving on its own. It was clothed, fueled, and mounted on American steel. Trucks, planes, artillery, endless supplies shipped west. More American-made equipment flowed to those Soviet formations than Japan had managed to produce in the entire war. The scale was almost obscene. Logistics, not bravery, explained the speed. The attackers weren't improvising. They were supplied, organized, unstoppable. The revelation turned shock into dread. Japan was no longer just outmatched, it was being squeezed from every direction. The empire is being squeezed from every direction. To the east, an enemy who can erase a city with a single, godlike explosion, a force that operates beyond the old rules of war. To the west, a mechanized juggernaut surges forward. Soviet columns, supplied with American trucks, planes, and materiel, tearing apart the legendary Kwantung Army. Supply lines, hope, and bargaining chips all collapse at once. There is no safe rear, no neutral mediator, no time to regroup. With both flanks deadlocked and the home islands exposed, the room in the palace grows small, and then a new, urgent flash arrives. On that same day, as reports from Manchuria painted the Kwantung Army as gone shattered columns, abandoned tanks, towns overrun, an urgent flash tore into the bunker like a second strike. Clerks snatched the teletype. Officers leaned forward. The message was clipped, coded, almost mechanical, but the cadence carried panic. Another city, another blast. For a single, stunned heartbeat, the room held its breath. The map on the table suddenly looked small and useless. This dispatch didn't ask a question. It announced a new, darker reality. Then the flash. A terse radio line. A second sun has risen over Nagasaki. For a heartbeat, no one moves. The picture is savage and simple. A blinding white fireball, a mushroom cloud like a second dawn clawing the sky, streets lit as if daylight had been welded to night. In the bunker, the silence deepens into a new kind of fear, because a second sun means this was not a single miracle. The message hit like a physical blow. Suddenly it was brutally, horribly clear. Hiroshima was not an anomaly. Nagasaki proved a grim pattern. Sato's quiet, unwelcome intelligence snapped into focus, his numbers and warnings no longer academic, but lethal and immediate. This wasn't magic or a one-off act of terror, it was engineering, industry, and choice, a weapon with a production line behind it. A new calculus replaced their old faith. Cities could be erased not by chance but by design. Pride turned to cold arithmetic. If one could be made, more could be made. They could build more. Voices from the outskirts came in short, stunned bursts. Men and women trying to find words for something that had no precedent. A godlike shockwave that rolled outward and flattened buildings for miles, snapping trees like twigs and turning whole blocks into rubble in a single crushing breath. Then the heat arrived, not a fire that grew, but an instantaneous, overwhelming blaze that ignited, seared, and melted whatever it touched. People described clothing vaporizing, windows blooming inward, and the air itself shimmering with a white, blinding light. Those testimonies were raw, urgent, and impossible to ignore, the kind of physical evidence that stopped argument dead and demanded belief. In the bunker, the sentence lands like a verdict. This is the new face of war. America can and will erase Japan's cities one by one from existence. It's not just a weapon anymore, it's an industrial policy turned into annihilation, a machine that turns factories, scientists, and dollars into fire. No clever maneuver, no heroic stand can stop that arithmetic. The realization strips away bravado. Talk of spirit and sacrifice sounds suddenly faint and useless. What once seemed unthinkable now becomes inevitable, measurable, and terrifyingly close each mushroom cloud, a proof that scale, not soul, will decide the future. There is no defense. There is no countermeasure. There is only annihilation. In that instant, the council felt the full, awful logic of the mushroom cloud. Cities could be erased in a single breath, and every fortification, every conscripted body, every clever ruse would only hand the enemy larger, cleaner targets. The old equation, spirit versus steel, attrition and sacrifice, beaches turned into graveyards, collapsed into one brutal truth. You cannot outwill a physics problem. Quiet fell like a verdict. Plans that had sustained a nation's pride now looked like invitations to self-destruction, and the very notion of a traditional defense was suddenly meaningless. In an instant, the country's master plan lost its footing. The terrifying math that had justified every sacrifice, let them land, let them bleed, and America will blink first, no longer worked. The atomic bomb didn't respect coastlines or coral reefs or the sacred code of valor. It turned beaches into bait and soldiers into targets before a single rifle was fired. Massing troops, building defenses, concentrating ships and cities to hold the line. All of it would only hand the enemy a bigger, brighter aim. Strategy curdled into superstition. What had been doctrine became a death sentence, and the room with the maps fell suddenly very, very quiet. With the old plan already dead, another grim truth emerges. Concentrating forces for a final defense would only create larger, more tempting targets for the atomic bombs. Massing divisions, stockpiling artillery, piling refugees into designated strongholds, all of it would turn whole regions into single, irresistible aims. Instead of a shield, it would be a beacon. Commanders realized that every bunker, every troop convoy, every warehouse of supplies would magnify the damage, not blunt it. The math was brutal and simple. Bigger targets, bigger destruction. For the first time, strategy smelled less like honor and more like inevitable ruin. It hit them with brutal clarity. Every plan to mass troops for a last, glorious defense suddenly read like a death sentence for the nation's cities. Gathered divisions meant gathered targets, rail hubs, ports, factory belts, whole urban centers that fed and sheltered an army ripe for a single, merciless strike. The math was terrible and simple. Concentrate your strength, and you concentrate your destruction. Cities that would support those forces would simply become ash before the invasion even began. No heroic counterattack could follow, no orderly evacuation, only ruin so complete it would erase the very ground the army hoped to hold. Inside the bunker, the arguments die as if some invisible hand has dropped a curtain. The fiery defiance that filled these walls for years evaporates. The booming voices, the clipped orders, the ritualized outrage, all of it gives way to a stunned, hollow quiet. Men who had vowed death rather than surrender sit motionless, eyes fixed on maps they no longer trust. Paper rustles like a guilty animal. A single clock ticks, loud enough to sound like an accusation. No one laughs. No one rages. The silence is not relief. It is the stunned pause before a verdict, waiting for someone to name the new, unbearable truth. Silence hangs heavy after the arguments, no bravado, no ceremonial noise, just the bunker's breath held tight. Then General Umezu, who spent months scoffing at every warning, leans forward and speaks in a voice that's almost a whisper. He admits it. The bomb changes everything. Short, brutal. The words fall like stones. For the first time, a map of defeat is drawn, not on paper, but in their minds, cities erased, strategies pointless, sacrifice meaningless, if the nation itself can be wiped away. Eyes track each other, some gripping tables, others staring at nothing. The confession clears something in the room. A new, terrible clarity takes hold, and with it, the space for a different voice to be heard. Then, against every rule of history and ceremony, the emperor speaks. The room freezes. Soldiers who never imagined defiance from their sovereign sit up like children. His voice is low, measured not a general's bark, but the steady thing a nation still trusts. For the first time, the imperial seal is more than a symbol. It becomes a decision. Faces that argued, debated, and rationalized fall into a stunned silence. What he says doesn't just carry orders, it dissolves argument. In that single intervention, the moral calculus of the war shifts from strategy to survival, and the council feels the weight of the nation settle on its shoulders. Then the emperor speaks an act no one thought they'd ever hear in that room, and the air itself seems to pause. His voice is quiet, almost unbearably calm, but the words land like verdicts. The unbearable consequences of continuing the war, the total destruction of the nation, the endless deaths must be borne, and the time has come to end it. For a moment, there is nothing but stunned silence, the old certainties cracking like lacquer. This single imperial sentence shifts the balance. It turns desperate debate into an urgent, grim necessity. Whatever follows will be painful, but the option to keep fighting has, at last, been taken off the table. Even as the leaders sign the papers and the palace breathes, a slice of fanaticism snaps. Hardline officers choosing death over dishonor move like ghosts through moonlit corridors, bayonets and pistols cold in their hands. They cut lines, seal gates, and race for the imperial radio room, intent on stealing the voice that will tell a nation to stand down. Their faces are set, their logic is gone. This is not strategy but ritual, one last act of purity before ruin. For a few frantic hours, the palace becomes a battleground between obedience and orders, truth, and the desperate wish to keep fighting. It erupts, and then it's over, quick, brutal, almost absurd in its finality. Young officers rush the palace in a last, desperate bid to stop what they call dishonor, but the attempt splinters within hours. Guards hold, radio lines are cut, and the conspirators' fervor dissolves into gunfire and confusion. The palace itself trembles from the violence, then settles into a stunned silence, as if the building is taking a breath it hasn't been allowed in years. That silence becomes the decision. With the coup crushed and the last ideology spent, Japan offers its unconditional surrender. On board the USS Missouri, amid gleaming brass and the indifferent sea, Foreign Minister Shigemitsu sat at a folding table and signed Japan's surrender. The gesture was almost painfully ordinary: a pen, a folded paper, a witness list. Yet every stroke echoed like a verdict. He later noted the cruel irony: the battleship beneath them had been built faster than his navy could plan a single major operation. That offhand observation landed like an accusation. Not only had they been defeated in battle, they had been outpaced by an industrial tempo their doctrine never accounted for. The ink dried, and with it, the last illusion of parity. The American occupation that follows strips away every myth in plain light. What had been portrayed as an equal struggle, duels of spirit and honor, looks absurd beside untouched warehouses, rolling convoys, and hospitals brimming with medicine. Japanese leaders who signed on the deck of the Missouri now watch men and machines restore order with a speed that feels like another language. It is not only that the U.S. won, it's that they never had the same tools to begin with. The honor defense was moot against supply lines and factories humming on an industrial scale. For Japan, the surrender is humiliation. For the world, a lesson in mismatched realities. It wasn't just a metaphor anymore, it was a glaring, almost obscene fact. One single U.S. infantry division, rolled with more trucks and vehicles than the entire Imperial Japanese Army combined. That image strips away any romantic talk of spirit and honor and reveals the blunt reality of modern war. Whoever moves supplies wins. Trucks bring food, ammunition, medevac, the ability to concentrate force and disperse it again. Japan's soldiers marched where Americans drove. They depleted themselves of strength, while the occupiers arrived with infrastructure already built. That contrast, mobility and logistics versus scarcity and attrition, made the imbalance painfully, inescapably clear. When American divisions arrived, it wasn't just guns and flags. They brought kitchens that smelled of hot food, mobile hospitals with real medicine, and a rolling ocean of trucks and spare parts that never seemed to run dry. Men who'd been chasing ration cards suddenly had clean socks and bandages. Wounded faces were stitched and fed, instead of left to fade. Across the line, the contrast was brutal. Japanese units were hollowed out by hunger, weakened by illnesses that might have been stopped with basic supplies, their morale corroded by exhaustion and loss. It was a quiet, devastating proof that logistics, not valor alone, had decided the war a truth Colonel Sato would later bury in ink. In his final report, Colonel Sato distilled an entire catastrophe into one merciless sentence. Our defeat began the moment we attacked an enemy we fundamentally misunderstood. Those words land like a verdict, not just on strategies and battles, but on a national mindset that mistook honor for strength and sentiment for strategy. Sato meant what it says. They had misread America's engine, its factories, its science, its capacity to suffer and rebuild, and paid for that error with millions of lives. His line becomes an epitaph for an era of delusion, a quiet, relentless accusation that would echo through Japan's reckoning long after the guns fell silent. In 1946, Admiral Toyota delivered the final, painful summation, a line that stripped away pride in a single sentence. We thought democracy made them soft. We learned it fueled innovation. We thought diversity made them weak. We learned it provided talent. Those words landed like a verdict. What had been dismissal, a moral superiority, a spiritual edge, was revealed as blind arrogance. The enemy's strengths weren't flaws to be mocked, but engines of power. Open debate that accelerated ideas. A society that harvested skill from every corner. That realization didn't just rewrite strategy. It forced a moral accounting that would haunt Japan's leaders for years. In the stunned quiet that followed surrender, the men who had steered a nation into ruin were forced to look at what they had done, and it broke them in different ways. Some, unable to live with the shame and the dead, chose a final escape. Others survived but were undone, turning their remaining years into quiet atonement. Teachers of peace, tireless campaigners against war, men who wouldn't let the past be forgotten. Many carried ghosts, the faces of cities turned to ash, the children who never grew up, and every act of contrition was a small, imperfect answer to a question their doctrine had never imagined. What do you do when your faith has killed millions? In the end, they had trusted their spirit over reality, and reality always wins. What followed wasn't just defeat on maps and surrender documents, it was a moral accounting. Generals who chose silence or suicide, politicians who lived to regret, millions of anonymous lives vaporized or wasted, feeding an illusion. The nation learned, painfully and forever, that courage without comprehension is not victory, but tragedy, and that myths of purity cannot stand against raw material power and innovation. So the final lesson sits like a stone in the throat. How many of the unbreakable truths we live by today are just illusions waiting for their own reckoning?